From its cradle in Central Asia, the plague slowly migrated towards man. It was carried in the bloodstream of black rats and in the fleas which fed on them. The bacillus spread quickly as it moved along trade routes in the blood of infected rats. With it came the plague, spreading like a deadly river of death, first into China and then south into India and west into Egypt and Asia Minor. Within 8 years, it had reached the Crimea. Rumors of a terrible plague raging in the east began to circulate through the Mediterranean seaports, but no one thought this disease would strike Europe. A group of Italian merchants, expelled from their trading post of Tana, had taken refuge in the fortified city of Kaffa on the Black Sea. Tensions between the Christian merchants from Italy and the local Muslim residents erupted in a street brawl. A minor skirmish soon became a war. The Muslims sought help from their local Mongol prince to lay siege to the Italians inside the walls of Kaffa. The siege was almost a year old when the plague erupted amongst the Mongol army. So many soldiers died that they were forced to call off the siege. But before they withdrew, the prince came up with a deadly plan, one of the first and most highly effective forms of germ warfare. Giant wooden siege machines were already lined up outside the city walls. Now, the Mongol prince ordered his troops to load the catapults with a deadly new missile. One by one, the rotting carcasses of plague-infected soldiers were hurled through the air over Kaffa's walls. What seemed like mountains of dead were thrown into the city. Soon the rotting corpses tainted the air and poisoned the water supply. Within days, the people inside the walls of Kaffa began to die. Those merchants who could escape hurried aboard their galleys and prepared to set sail for Italy. Flea-infested rats climbed the mooring ropes and hid in the holds of the ships that were heading for the Mediterranean. Little did the sailors know what a deadly cargo they were carrying. No one noticed that the shipboard rats were diseased. The galleys sailed from port to port on their long journey back to Italy, but no one would let them dock when it was seen that the sailors were dying. In October 1347, the merchants finally reached the port of Messina in Sicily. The terrified harbour masters tried to isolate the ships, but it was already too late. Even as the first mooring ropes were being tied, the rats were making their way ashore. Although the galleys were forced to move on, this brief encounter was long enough for the Black Death to enter Europe. Europe in 1348 was already overpopulated and beset with problems. Weakened by wars, harvest failures, famines, and other epidemics, the plague was yet another in a series of disasters to strike Europe. Churches were centers of learning, with unquestioned authority over the population. With no other explanations of life to turn to, people looked to the church and their local priest for spiritual support and solace. Michael of Piazza, a Franciscan friar, received news of the outbreak of plague just days after its arrival in Sicily. He prayed to God that the disease would not spread.
Pater noster qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum et libera nos a malo. Amen.
But his prayers were not answered. Within days, everyone who had had any contact with the dying sailors was dead. After a week, the plague had spread throughout the city of Messina. Carts loaded with corpses arrived at the churches almost by the hour.
Men were borne to burial by day and night, with only a short service. The houses of the dead were shut up, for no one dared enter them.
Those living in already overcrowded houses were oblivious to the arrival of the infected black rats. Fleas thrived in the filth and clung to the clothes of the dead, which were then sold or passed on.
When anyone who is infected by the disease dies, all who visit him or do business with him, or even carry him to the grave, quickly follow him there.
As the plague spread into the surrounding countryside, it was clear that no one was safe. Within a month, the Black Death had spread throughout Sicily. Friar Michael set off on a journey round the island. Believing the plague was decreed by God and that man should not oppose it, he hoped to bring spiritual comfort to the sick. Many priests had already died, but Michael was one of the few who would survive the plague and live to describe its horrors.
On the day the victim was stricken, blisters and boils appeared on the arms, legs, and neck. They so weakened and tormented his body that he had to take to his bed. Soon the boils grew to the size of a walnut, then to that of a hen's egg or a goose's egg, and they were exceedingly painful. The sickness lasted 3 days. By the 4th day, the plague had claimed another victim.
People reacted to the plague with astonishment, bewilderment, and terror. They thought they were witnessing the end of the world, God's punishment for all the sin on earth.